The American Civil Liberties Union is suing Education Secretary Betsy DeVos for daring to defend the civil liberties of university males accused of sexual assault. It's like an article from the satirical publication The Onion, only true and sad and predictably progressive. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we're starting with the ACLU and their quest to destroy due process on campus, thanks to Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos. And, you know, this just is puzzling to me. The American Civil Liberties Union, which, 100 years ago, used to be willing to protect anybody for free speech. Look, one of our civil liberties is the right to free speech. I remember back in the 60s, they were willing to defend the right of Nazis to speak. And they were right.
And the Ku Klux Klan.
And the Ku Klux Klan. As much as you don't like them, let them speak so the rest of us can shout them down. They were willing to defend gun rights at one point. Now they are the anti-civil liberties group, or the ACLU, the A minus a clue, CLU, right? That's what they are. The fact that all Betsy DeVos has done is correct the excesses of the Obama administration. Obama sent that dear colleague letter around, which basically gave universities permission, not legally, but wink, wink, give universities permission to persecute men who are accused of sexual assault, even if there isn't much evidence, without any cross-examination allowed by the men, without allowing the lawyers for the accused men to see all the evidence. With a simple wink from the Obama administration, due process was thrown away. What did Betsy DeVos do? And I've been hard on her for her stands on Common Core, but if she did nothing else over the last 4 years than that, God bless her and God bless her tenure as education secretary. She fixed it. And now it's not just howling progressives. It's not just #MeToo hypocrites. It's not just Joy Behar and the hen clucking crew on The View who are saying this is bad. It's the ACLU saying that suing Betsy DeVos for defending civil liberties and due process.
Yeah, it's not even them using their free speech to just bemoan the whole thing. They're actually bringing suit. They're claiming that DeVos had discarded decades of the Department of Education's experience addressing sexual harassment and assault by promulgating regulatory provisions that sharply limit educational institutions' obligations to respond to reports of sexual harassment and assault. If allowed to be implemented at educational institutions nationwide, these provisions will make the promise of equal educational opportunities, irrespective of sex, even more elusive. This is true for all students, including students of color, LGBTQ students, and students with and without disabilities in grade school, high school, and higher education.
And we saw yesterday when we were talking about the attack on homeschool, how that
watch that episode.
Watch that episode if you haven't seen it. That radical lefty Elizabeth Bertholet, she said that the reason we have to get rid of homeschooling is because it's not regulated.
Yes.
That we have every right to regulate everything, and if we're not regulating school, it doesn't count. Here you have the same progressive saying when it comes to sexual assault on college campuses, Betsy DeVos regulating who can accuse who of whom based on the Constitution is a huge overstep of government. You see how they have it both ways, right? When it's a liberal progressive cause, there should be no regulation. Let the liberalism flow. When conservatives or conservative issues or seemingly conservative issues like homeschooling, when they're allowed to thrive, they must be regulated. It really is a stunning instance of double talk. And explain that to me. How? How is somebody with or without disabilities going to be hurt if a young man accused of sexual harassment has the same rights as the woman? How is that going to hurt somebody with disabilities? Please explain to me. Especially, look, go back to 1960. And let's say that this was the ACLU, right? Let's say a young black male had been accused of rape by a racist white young girl. Whose side do you think the ACL would be on? Do you think the ACLU would be on the side of the white girl? No. They would have been on side of the persecuted black kid, and they would have demanded that the black kid have, and as he should, have the same due process rights as the white girl did. Now, here we jump forward to 2020, to the year 2020, and what they're telling you is that somehow, if a African-American boy who's accused of assault by a white female, somehow, if he doesn't get his due process rights, if he doesn't get them, that's a good thing for students of color. Literally, they're saying that.
None of them have read To Kill a Mockingbird. But I digress.
None of them have read
anything.
Basic Logic 101.
Well, joining the ACLU in this lawsuit is Know Your Nine. Get it? Like Title IX. Know Your Nine. An advocacy group which sprouted up to help students use the Obama administration's rules. Also joining is the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, Girls for Gender Equality, and Stop Sexual Assault in Schools, which is another Title IX advocacy group that was inspired by the Obama rules. So they're all joining suit with the ACLU in this.
I'm repeating this again because I just made it up on the fly. I didn't have that prepared, and I think it's pretty good, so I'm going to repeat it. Again, if a young African-American male on a college campus is accused of sexual assault by a racist female just because she doesn't like his race, what you're being told now by all these liberal groups is the rights of the African-Americans, a male being violated, are meaningless compared to the complaint of the girl, the young girl. And number two, that by persecuting the black student without any civil liberties or due process, you are actually advancing the cause of racial equity. That's what they're asking you to believe.
And that's what you need to think about as we move forward with this one. So the American Civil Liberties Union does not defend civil liberties.
It's dead in the water. This is not going to get past
the tagline.
This is not going to hold any water legally. These suits will all be thrown out. This is not going anywhere. But the fact that they're doing it, if you are a racial minority, you ought to be. If you're somebody who remembers Jim Crow and the lack of due process for African Americans, it really ought to piss you off.
Okay, moving on to the next story, which involves the one, the only Mike Rowe, who is a TV host, he's an author, he's just an all-around good dude. And he's known for his show Dirty Jobs, if you've seen it, where basically he's not too hoity-toity, I'll say, to go and do the jobs that everyday Americans are doing.
Mike Rowe is a roll-up-your-sleeves,
there you go,
all-American mensch.
All-American
mensch, baby.
Well, all right. Well, he was recently on Dave Rubin's The Rubin Report to talk about basically how coronavirus has affected, everything. And when they got to the segment talking about education, here's what he had to say.
I think when the dust settles, higher education is going to be revealed for the luxury brand that it truly is. And when you take away all of the stuff that has nothing to do with learning or connecting, you're going to be left with a breathtakingly overpriced product.
Hey, producer Mike, there's a great meme on the internet of The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, doing this, right? And I want you to show that to the audience because he's a slightly less good-looking me. But Mike Rowe, what else needs to be said? I mean, he's exactly right. As somebody who actually lives and works at the inside of universities, have done it now, so make this point, 27 years at 7 different universities, plus another 9 years in universities, 3 more universities, as a student. 36 years inside the belly. I'm not inside the belly of the beast. I'm inside the belly of the parasite that lives in the belly of the beast. I'm living in the tapeworm inside higher academia. That's what I am. And he's right. If you separate the actual learning and the occasional connectivity that goes on in colleges, right? Building networks of people for the purpose of future, life, letters of recommendation, job recommendation, that sort of thing. You separate that out. That's probably only about 30% of what goes on in college campuses. The rest of it is utterly unnecessarily, thoroughly politicized, exceedingly expensive, and just unnecessary. You go back to that 30%, which means you shrink the overall number of people who attend college by about 40%. I've said this from the beginning. It's true now as it was 3 years ago. 40% of my students shouldn't be in college. 40. They don't belong there. They don't want to do the work, some of them. They can't do the work, a lot of them. And their attitudes don't want to learn how to do the work. If you took 40%, and COVID's not going to take that many. If COVID were to, for the next 20 years, for whatever reason, take away 40% of our college kids, a lot of schools would collapse. There's no doubt about it. But the ones that remained could focus on those students who potentially were better equipped and more willing and more suited to universities. And it might allow universities to reform all of this other stuff away. When university, and we're going to see a couple stories this week about universities who are already closing. University of Western Missouri, for instance, it's basically fired 30% of its faculty and got rid of almost all of it. No English majors, no history, got rid of all of it. That's going to happen more and more. But if we could get to the point where schools focused on those who wanted to and were intellectually capable of school, now that means you exclude those who are not. And get rid of this diversity paradigm and get rid of this argument that the purpose of college is not higher learning at all. It's about inclusion, right? Then you could fix the system, but that's not going to happen.
Well, and Mike said right before he gave that clip, he said, I've been the past couple of weeks, I took a class at MIT online for free. And if we had more people even just doing that and seeing that, wow, I can do this education at home in the comfort of my own living room and not have to hear some of these professors, I could actually get a real education. And he basically says that there are going to be people out there taking deeper dives into things online, recognizing what they find is actually much more profound and interesting than professors in college.
And look, I got to tell you, as a 27-year professor, I find online collegiate learning ineffective. It's not nearly as effective online college as what might be for the younger grade kids. It's just not, because that kind of level of intellectual sparks that ought to be thrown off, that kind of deep engagement into serious issues, it's just not possible online as easily. It's a big step down. And I will only say this. We are in this mess because the faculty did it to themselves. We decided that left-wing politics mattered more than knowledge. We decided that inclusion and diversity mattered more than actually catering to those kids who wanted to and could succeed at college. We decided that the only way to make money as an academic was to promote everybody to administrative purposes, right? Stop giving faculty raises. Let their salaries stew, right, and fester, while incorporating hundreds and hundreds of diversity officers who are all doing the exact same jobs for 4 times the money of your typical faculty member. Whatever happens to college, we brought it on ourselves.
Oh, on to the next story where we go to Michigan. The University of Michigan's President Mark S. Schlissel wrote a Dear Colleague letter to provide information about what's been happening with the university, obviously with COVID-19 going on. And so the letter began with the usual, we're all in this together. We've all been affected by it, and it's, let's roll up our sleeves and see what we can do. And he said good things about how they were able to pay their workers all the way through April, okay? And then the shoe dropped. And he says, these uncertainties continue to impose a set of very real challenges on the university. Virtually all sources of revenue the university relies on for daily operations are in question. At the same time, we are managing new costs that arose quickly. Our best estimate is that the university, including all 3 campuses and Michigan Medicine, currently faces anticipated losses of $400 million to $1 billion through the end of the calendar year.
Well, I'm just saying they've got it. I don't know what, I should have probably looked it up. I don't know what their endowment is, but it's Michigan. They are considered the #1, the premier public school. They call themselves the public school Ivy, right? They're ranked very high. They're oftentimes considered an Ivy League school that's not Ivy League, kind of like Stanford. I promise you they have more than $1 billion endowment. I promise you that they've got multi-billions of dollars. And so if they were forced to pay for all of that themselves, and they won't be. If they were, especially with a completely clueless liberal governor like Gretchen, right? The universities aren't going to take the major hit here. So you're not going to have to pay for it all. Let's say you had to pay $400 million. It's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket for you. But, you start from the premise, these progressive universities, that what we have is ours. It's not yours. What we have by way of endowment belongs to the university. Yes. Your taxpayer money belongs to us too. And so when it comes down to who has to pay for all of this, our money stays our money. and you have to come up with more money. Or we won't dip into what's mine, the university administrators say.
There you go.
We'll start firing off faculty. We'll start laying off our cafeteria workers.
That's
right?
basically kind of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So he then wrote about the principles they wish to maintain, blah, 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 and moved on to, okay, here are actions to preserve financial resources, beginning with elimination of non-essential expenditures, which include travel and conferences. We'll see if that actually happens. There's a hiring freeze now, as you know, you probably are well aware of how
These are
hiring
standard
freezes.
all across
Yep.
the country, right?
All of it is frozen with the possible exception of staff or faculty and roles considered critical, and those fully funded by federal grants. So
So in other words, yeah, right? And here's another thing.
critical?
I'm in a small branch campus of a bigger we've been doing that stuff for 10 years.
Exactly.
Welcome to the party, buddy. I mean, now that the fact that it's now Michigan, right? The University of Michigan Northampton, I just made that up, right?
did you?
Who's got 3,000 students. They've been dealing with this
Yeah.
for 25 years, right? You, now the big boys, the maize and blue, right?
Wow.
Hail to the victors valiant. Hail to the spend all of our money. Hail, hail to Michigan. This is the Michigan man philosophy. And look, not to be anti-Michigan, I know you know I'm an Ohio State fan. Same with the Buckeyes, right? Same with all these big universities. Right now we're going through this crisis at the University of Wisconsin system. And what were we told? We've been told that the two biggest schools, UW-Madison and UW-Milwaukee, will be mostly shielded from the vast majority of these budget cuts, while the other remaining 11 Wisconsin.
peons.
Yep, the other remaining 11 Wisconsin State system schools are going to suffer the disproportionate value because Madison will be protected. Just like I'm pretty sure when it's all said and done, Go Blue will be okay. Not so sure about the adjunct campuses.
Well, it's probably going to be okay because, you know, I mean, salary freezes are already happening, but leadership is taking salary reductions. I have decided, the president says, Schlissel says, I've decided to cut my own monthly salary by 10%, starting May 1 through the end of this calendar year. Isn't that through, isn't July start a new year?
I believe
Calendar year, or whatever. I don't know what they do. For the same period, the Dearborn and Flint chancellors have volunteered to reduce their salaries by 10%. And the remaining executive officers, chief diversity officer, and athletic director have volunteered to reduce their salaries by 5%.
Have you heard the football coach? I didn't hear the football coach listen.
Well, the athletic director, not
right.
the
The
football coach.
athletic director probably makes 1/10 of what
Yeah,
Jim
exactly.
Harbaugh makes.
I was going to say, is Harbaugh
Right?
still
But
there?
here's the other thing. If you're a guy at a place like Michigan is making easily $1 million a year. So 10%, why not 50%? You're telling me, Michigan president, that $500,000 a year versus $1 million is something you cannot live on, when I guarantee you the university has provided you your house. You didn't have to buy it. You're not paying a mortgage. I'm guaranteeing you that the university is providing you company cars, right? You're not paying for that either. So what's this 10%? Look, freeze my salary. I'm going to laugh in your face. My salary has largely been frozen for the last 30 years, right? I'm not worried about it. Come on, freeze it, big boy. What's going to happen? I'm going to live like I did in 1990. I'm still doing it. But you and your $1 million salary, cut 50. Cut it to the bone, big boy. Show us you really care. 10%. Huh, you spend that on golf fees.
It's time for some real education. Today on Instant Classic, we consider the intersection of art and science, taking some time to ponder the famous Muscle Man illustrations in the world's first great manual on human dissection.
And you heard Katie right. We're going to look at the intersection of art and science as we consider the first great anatomical treatise in the history of really the world. Show the picture there is, the man on the left there is Andreas Vesalius of Brussels. And in 1543, he produced the world's first great anatomic text. It was a huge, thick book that talked about what he saw when he actually dissected human bodies himself. Up until now, all through the Middle Ages and all through the ancient world of Greece and Rome, generally speaking, human bodies were not allowed to be dissected. They were religious taboos. The classical world had religious taboos. The Christian world had them for a while. That bodies were to be prayed over and buried, or burned. They were not to be cut into. Well, in the late Middle Ages, that began to change a little bit as some doctors began to actually dissect some bodies. How do you know what's in a human body unless you can look inside it? And one of the big flaws, and that's true of world medicine, almost nowhere in the world, that includes China, that includes Native America, that includes Africa, nobody was dissecting human bodies. Medicine was based on observational things, but nobody knew what a heart did. It's one of the reasons why we didn't discover that the heart pumped blood until about 1618, the discovery of the circulation by Harvey. And you couldn't have gotten there without this in 1543. So go back to the first picture, Mike. There's Vesalius. And what was so unique about him is that he actually, as a doctor, did the dissecting himself. So that what he saw is what he wrote in his book. And so there was a correlation between, very scientific, right? A very scientific leap forward. You were seeing with your own eyes. The doctor was inside the body. And so there was the possibility of research and teaching. And one of the things he did was produce a book. And show some of the pictures now, Mike. Some of these illustrations in the book are absolutely gorgeous. They are works of art in themselves. There are hundreds of them. And there's an entire series of men who's had their skin flayed off. Why? To show you what the musculature of the human body looked like under the skin. How did the muscles work together? Were the muscles joined? How were long muscles different from compact muscles? And these were done by dissections. Go back to the one right before this. And you can see there on the left, right? They take they're not just still figures. They're posing in various ways. They're not just demonstrating musculature like we would expect in a modern anatomical treatise. They were demonstrating movement. These are incredibly high artistic quality drawings. Now, we know that Vesalius didn't do the drawings himself. Would you be surprised to learn that no less a figure than Titian, the great Renaissance painter, his school was responsible for producing all those images? We don't know that the master Titian himself actually did those drawings, but we do know that from his school, from his workshop, these wonderful images in all of their detail, I mean, they're so detailed in their drawing. They're actually a much bigger help in instances than even the text is, because they are so accurately drawn. And that's the intersection of art and science, and how the two disciplines used to work together without being opposed to each other.
I hope you are stronger of the mind now for knowing that. As always, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And if you have a question for our Friday Q&A, visit freedomproject.com/askduke or send us a message on social media. And don't forget that Freedom Project Academy is still enrolling for this upcoming fall. All right, before we go, as always, let's get today's fun fact of the day. Did you know that Mike Rowe, both his parents were teachers, and that he actually has an operatic background? He sings to this day either bass or baritone for some weddings and funerals.
Did you also know there was a great Christian hymn named after him?
I did not know that.
Michael row the boat ashore, hallelujah. And that's going to do it for this show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay educated, my friends, or else.